Thank you, James. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on testing and actually pushing our audience here to think about what is testing to them and to take pride in what work they do. I hope each of us learned something from you. Our next speaker is Anand Bagmar. He's going to talk to you about patterns of good automation framework. I hope you enjoy the session. Please, Anand.
Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Oh, good morning, everyone. Oh, now I recognize James. I didn't recognize you earlier without the hat. Thanks, James, for the inspiring and thought-provoking talk to start off our excellent day today. What I hope is going to be getting even more better. Today, I'm going to talk about patterns in test automation framework. A quick introduction about myself. I'm Anand Bagmar. I'm the test practice leader at Thoughtworks. Been doing testing for a long time. I do anything, everything that involves testing, and that's enough about me. If I'm here throughout the day, you can contact me today, later, using my Twitter or other contact information from the About Me page. Earlier, when I was talking to James, or rather when we were talking earlier, we thought that it's going to be really different what we are talking about. In fact, James, I think it's more of a lead on to what you said. That's what we'll be covering. Test automation. What James said, what really testing is. I agree with that philosophy, what that mindset is. The minute you write it down, it sort of loses its value in a certain way. But that's not what we are going to talk about today. What we are going to talk about is assuming you have done the first step of doing the right things for validating the quality of a product, of that requirement. What's next? The next thing is identifying what makes sense to automate in code and repeat that validation every time the product code changes to ensure what was working earlier continues to work well. And what this means is you need to be good about really understanding what is important to be automated. You need to be good about automating the right intent so that the essence of that check, that validation is captured and not just another test automated in your code. That said, let's talk about patterns. What is a pattern? Pattern is something, a template of sorts that you can keep repeating in the right context and achieve some functionality, achieve some value out of it in a better way. Okay? And let's look at some case study to really understand what this means from an automation perspective. Though most of the automation discussion we'll be talking about is going to focus on the top layer of how you interact with the product, mostly the UI layer. This is something that you can apply in doing other types of validation as well, using including web service automation or as you go below the test pyramid. So let's look at a case study. This is an old Amazon.in or Amazon.com web page. Assuming you have identified what makes sense to automate for this particular web page, if you have to test this, you have a certain set of test cases or scenarios or flows, what you really call it, what makes sense to be automated. How would you start doing that? And what I'm going to show now using these case studies is some snippets of code. It could be in Java, it could be in Ruby. The code itself does not matter. The code, in fact, is not for Amazon.com. It's based on various experiences and different code bases that I've seen. We'll use that as a reference to demonstrate the point. Before we get into the code, how many people involved in automation over here? A great percentage. Excellent. So who is not familiar or comfortable with Java or Ruby? Few people. Okay, that's fine. I'll try to explain what that code represents in certain ways. So let's look at the first code example. Assuming you have to start automating something for Amazon.com page, and whatever that test case or scenario, whatever that intent might be, how would you really start off? So the first thing which potentially you could do is, I want to get my framework in place, just get started with that, and the first test typically that you write is, which driver am I using? So in this case, it is Ruby language using Selenium WebDriver. Okay. Now, if that is my tool set that I'm using, tech stack tool set that I'm using, what is the first thing that we do typically? Let's get some basic test started with, get the structure in place, get the code in place, ensure I can instantiate the driver, ensure I can open up the browser, whichever browser I want to use, go to that particular URL. That's the first thing I do. And then I'll start adding more functionality on top of it, what I want to validate and how I would validate that. So in this code example, it's exactly like that. I'm saying which driver I'm using. I've got my basic structure of the test. I'm instantiating the driver here, saying which browser I'm using, what timeouts I'm using over here. And then I start navigating and doing certain things with that particular intent implementation. That is how your test automation typically starts, assuming you're starting fresh, right? That is a good starting point, I believe. You get your basic infrastructure in place for that. And hopefully you take it to the next level and saying that if I have this test automated, how can I actually run it in an automated fashion using my CI infrastructure as well? So you get the product to scale up. How you want your test automation framework to scale up. Okay? And that's where patterns come into picture. I'm going to talk about a couple of patterns. I'm sure there are many more based on your experiences and mine that we can think of. But I'm going to talk about some most common patterns and how they can be leveraged over here. So the first one is a page object pattern. Anyone used this before? What does it mean? What is a page object pattern?
Each page, whatever you are
Sorry, she's saying something. Yeah. Yeah.
For each page you have an UI, you are creating a code for that, and then corresponding to that you are creating a test file for that. So if you are creating a locator, then you are placing all the things in the locator side, and then test corresponding to that page you are writing the test file.
Okay, so basically you are looking at the UI mapping and creating pages and corresponding classes for that, how you would start interacting with that page, right? Spot on in most ways. So basically what you're saying is model your UI layout in a code in some fashion. It also simulates user actions. How the user is really going to interact with that particular piece of functionality. Okay. What it helps do is it's a one-place change. So if something in that product page changes, you know you go to that one particular code file, make the changes, and hopefully everything continues to work well. Also what it means is now you're starting to reduce the code duplication. I don't have to spread that functionality. How do I get information from this particular locator in all my different test intents? That happens. And you can stretch it to the level of saying, think about snippets of pages as well. Okay? And we'll look at what this really means. The main intent of page object pattern though, or in terms of implementation, what it should do, these are dummy objects. Now what does dummy objects mean? It doesn't have any business logic as part of it. A page object is just a means of how do you interact with the functionality, which means how do I verify certain information from the page it is representing, and how do I do actions on that page. It doesn't have any other knowledge in it. You could potentially add the logic of saying that if there is a it's a form, and depending on what you select first, the next set of information should load out. So for example, if I select a country from drop down, based on the country, I'll fetch from the database or wherever which states are there as part of that country, right? We can relate to that example, right? So what it would mean is if I select India, I have to make a call to the backend system, get the list of states in India, and that would be represented in the next drop down. Okay? Now, because this is an Ajaxy kind of behavior, asynchronous behavior, it's not information or data is not loaded in the page at that time, it means there might be some delay before which I get that information back. And the page object can potentially have that logic to say, if I select a country, I want to wait for the next set of data to be populated, not what data, next set of data to be populated in the state field. Before I say I'm done, I can give the control back. Okay, so that's the extent of the type of logic that can be there in your page object, but nothing else. Okay? So as the first test that has been written is validated, and this would mean that now I need to talk to different page objects that I have created. It could be home page, my profile page, whatever different pages might be there. And you would also have some resources, which would mean, for example, okay, I want to talk to my test environment, to my pre-prod environment, to my dev environment, what are different types of environments might be there. You would have different resources for that. You could also extend it to some ways to say, if my data is different, for example, I need to log in and my login credentials are different for different environments, that could also be coming from different resource files. Resource is a very generic term in this case, right? So you pull it up based on the environment and use that to implement the code. And once this is done, then you would have various different actual interactions with your product happening. It could be using WebDriver. If it's some web services, you would have web service utilities, some other helpers utilities required for it. And that's how your framework would start growing. Okay? So as your framework has now evolved, you look at this and say, okay, if this is my page, or this is my product, how do I start modeling this in code? How do I start implementing this in code? And let's look at another example for this, where now I've got some structure in place. If this is my, in this case now it's a Java-based test. If this is my test, this is a bad implementation for the test for that matter. I now have started thinking about different pages that I'm interacting with, whatever the intent needs to do. I'm thinking about, oh, I have a registration page, I have a patient chart page, or whatever other pages are there. And of course, based on it, I would have actual implementations of that in code, of that page. I'm starting to move functionality from the test implementation, the intent implementation, to your page objects and starting to move things around. Of course, what this means is the team who is working on this code needs to be disciplined. Why? Because it's very easy to just copy paste one piece of code and start making changes in it. And as a result, what can potentially happen is, though I've got page objects, for some reason I'm still able to, or rather I'm still interacting with the direct elements of that page from my intent. Not a good practice. So it's a self-discipline also required, conversations required, pairing required to really understand what the framework needs to be, what are the page objects, what the architecture is, and you start interacting with that in that fashion. Okay? So now, you've gone a level above what your first implementation was, everything in one code, and you've started moving things out. While you're creating these page objects, you would create helper utilities. For example, how do I instantiate a driver? How do I close the browser version? How do I interact with certain elements, or wait for those actions to be completed before proceeding? And again, the Amazon homepage, there's so much information on this page. And if you try to model all of that in one big page class, it is going to start falling apart for various reasons. Why? Because you've got a search option field, which is common across any page that you go on Amazon, because that's the main thing, right? If you're able to search, only then will you buy. So search is replicated, but it's not just a search. The menu bar also is common across different pages in that product. And there is more. There are ads in it. There is a different preview or special promotions. There is recently viewed items. And from the menu itself, specific items would have more set of information or functionality that you can interact with. And there is just so much more over here. Okay? This is a very common thing now in one of the implementation patterns, a single page application. Do we know what is a single page application? It's not necessarily you're clicking on something, navigating to another page. Everything seems to be in one page. The URL remains the same. But as you do actions, you keep on moving to the next steps of the workflow, what you can do with that. So you cannot think of, okay, my product is a one-page application, so everything is going to be in that class. You have to start thinking what makes sense to split up in as reusable components and model it in smaller chunks. Why? Because if it's in smaller chunks, you can find that information easily. You can interact with it easily, you can reuse it, and you can modify it in a common way so that everyone can make use of that implementation. So with the page object pattern, now as it starts evolving, you start thinking about not just snippets of the pages, but you would also think about what are the entities are there, what models are there. And this relates very tightly with test data as well. Test data is one side of it, what goes into your implementation. The other aspect is how do you need to interact with your product itself. Now if I'm testing Amazon and there are different types of products, you have categories. Categories could be electronics, books, toys, whatever else that might be there. In each of those categories, there might be subcategories. And this is a classic way how you would build your inheritance structure of sorts, right? There's a common product that I'm selling. What does a product have? It has a title, a description, a price, potentially any offer, for example. And then based on each specific category or subcategory or whatever that classification might be, you would have some more specific implementation or attributes for that particular object. A book would have a different thing. It would have an ISBN versus an electronic item would have a serial number. It's different, right? How do you represent that? So you can think about that as entities and models, and this could be leveraged to also provide as test data from your test to say, I want to search for a phone of this particular model. What does that really mean? So your framework has now started to get more evolved, of course complex, but now it is doing many more things that are required. So you can think of a common API to interact with your product. So I just say I want to search for a product. I don't care if I'm really searching from the UI or a web service from my implementation perspective or my intent specification perspective, sorry. But I am now saying as part of this intent specification some flag or something to say I want to achieve this functionality using a web service call or from a UI. And based on that, the page would still say, okay, search for this product. But how is that search really happening? Based on that flag, it could go to WebDriver or to web services or HTML unit or any other driver that you're using. Does not really matter. Okay? So now your framework has evolved. The other thing that starts getting evolved now is helpers and utilities, loggers, resource handlers. You might want to have custom reporters to get more meaningful information from your test execution. And just using standard reports, if it's not sufficient, you can build your own. Likewise, web service utilities, because web services can get complex, and many a times to achieve the validation of an intent, you might want to make a set of calls, one after the other, using web services to achieve that functionality. So maybe there are utilities for that.
What is resource handler in this framework?
So resource could be how do I load the files, data files or environment configuration files, for example. That could be resources. And sorry, resource handlers you're talking. I spoke about resources. So different types of files you might want to handle in different ways. Right? I want to load XML. Some data is coming by XML, some is coming by JSON for whatever reason. Right? Or some of these web service calls is returning me a different type of information which I need to handle it. So you want to make common utilities out of this instead of having that implementation again spread out in different places. So that's what the resource handlers would do. How do I interact with XML, JSON, or whatever different file formats that you might have. Okay? Let's look at another example now of what would seem to be a much more better and evolved framework using this particular pattern. Now, I start creating these partial pages. I'm calling it partial. What you call it doesn't really matter. As long as the team working on this code base understands what it represents, what it means, that is important. So you could call it anything which is intuitive to the team who's using it. I'm calling it partials, and in this case, I'm just taking very specific things, and it's not really about the size of the page. It doesn't matter if I have just one method or one variable declared over there. If it adds value, if it makes sense to isolate that, do it. Why? Because if you don't do it, your page might become just so complex, like in the earlier case. I've got this home page which has got about 1,000 lines of code in it. Now if a class has got 1,000 lines of code in it, how easy will it be for someone to find it? Our IDEs have become much more evolved and powerful, yes. But does it still mean that anyone can find what they are looking for easily? And what's the easiest way out for it? I don't know if that particular functionality exists. It's their part of home page, so I'll just implement a new method based on what I think it should be named and implement that. And what might end up happening is you have a couple of implementations doing the same thing just because you've not been able to find it. That's another very important reason why you break it down into smaller snippets, because with smaller snippets I know for a search, I know what to do with it. I can enter different types of text, I can do advanced search. What it really means, I'll go to that one specific snippet and I'll implement it or I'll make changes over there. Easier to find, easier to evolve, easier to reuse. Okay? So we've got partials over here. Based on partials, then based on different functionalities, you can have, again, more pages around it. And you've got your various different services and utilities. And with this better representation of the pages, I can start combining, making more complex pages using these snippets. So my home page has a menu bar, so does my product detail page. I'm just going to reuse these page snippets into creating what that page represents right now. For whatever reason, if I don't have search on one of the pages, I just don't have to include that one page into creating that page, that type of page. With me? Okay? So this is what a better, more evolved page object pattern really looks like. Now, this is all good. We've got to a stage where we are starting to think more about code. How can we reuse a lot of it and maintain it in a sane fashion and evolve it as it goes? However, there are still limitations with this particular pattern. Can anyone think of that? A lot of people are doing automation over here. A lot of people have heard about page object pattern and are using it. What are the limitations of page object pattern?
Well, it does no testing at all. You keep calling it a test, and there's not a single bit of testing that's in any of what you've shown us.
Absolutely, I agree with
So
that.
that's a limitation. Just remember, everything that you've been showing us is just an interface that theoretically will help somebody test someday, but it hasn't actually done any testing. It's just hooking into the user interface in different ways. Isn't that true?
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah. As I said when I began, this is not about testing. Once you have validated the functionality, you have understood, and for whatever thought process you have figured out, this makes sense to be automated.
But eventually you are adding it to the test environment, isn't it?
Exactly. So you have validated everything, specific scenarios, specific implementations. You say, I want to repeat this validation every time any code changes, and I don't want to do it manually because it's been validated once, it's working well. And now we're talking about the implementation side of that.
But those validations are very limited. Unlike a human, they're just looking at simple facts. That's why I call this checking rather than testing. It's
And that's not the
fact-checking.
question in this case, right?
Well, you
I'm
said
not getting
what's
into the
limitations.
No, I'm not getting into the semantics of are we checking, are we doing what?
I'm not talking about semantics either. I'm talking about, are you doing damn testing? And if you have a tool that's doing something that is not related to what a human would do when they test, that's not a semantics issue. That's a getting the job done issue.
Okay, I think we're digressing over here. I'll
You
move
said
on from this.
limitations and you asked the audience, and
And I agreed with that, and I'm moving on from there.
Yeah, maybe we can put it like,
Yeah.
because once we understand what we have to test, and the checking part of it is what is the repeatable part, that yes, but because the testing part cannot be identified by the tools, that is the human part. But once you know that, okay, this is what we are testing, and then we have to repeat it to the tools, that part is the checking part.
Testers are not fact checkers. That's not what we are. That is part
And
of
that's
our
not
work.
what this session is about.
That's part of our work, but please don't call that testing, and please don't say it's a matter of semantics when you diminish us to just fact checkers that we're having a tool do instead of us. We are not just fact checkers. Yes, it's helpful to have a fact checking system, but it insults us to say it's just semantics. To be careful about how you use the word test. Please be careful about that.
Okay, moving on from that aspect. When we start looking at the code side of these things, right, as the framework has evolved, and the duplication we spoke about. Also, what it means is, in order to make these tweaks possible, your intent specification starts getting imperative. What it means is, I now need to break it down into more aspects of how am I interacting with the product instead of why am I interacting with that product like that. What am I trying to validate out of that product? And you don't want to be saying, I want to click on this particular element in the intent. Instead, what you're saying is, I want to ensure the correct set of states are now coming up once I've selected my country, for example. And that sort of limitation starts coming up as more and more tests start getting automated. As a result, it starts becoming a maintenance challenge. There's so much code over there now, you've got so much automated, and you don't really know what is automated. You're just executing it because I have it automated, you're just keeping on executing it. How many of us are actually going through the pains of saying, this validation does not make sense anymore? It's old, it's deprecated, it's not used. The test is not failing, but it's not used. Why can I not just delete it all? Just having an automated test doesn't really help. And all of this results in scaling challenges. If I want to do a quick fix and release to production or do a release, I now need to run all these different tests, which might take a very delayed feedback cycle. Because of such problems, anyone has relates to these problems, by the way? From an automation perspective? Yeah? As the test suite really grows, even though you have spent the right effort in building a page object pattern, it starts creating bottlenecks of sort after a certain point in time. And that's where I started calling it a business layer page object pattern. It can be called anything. I've heard it being called as a domain layer page object pattern or whatever else you really call it. The intent really of this evolved page object pattern is to separate the test intent and the business layer. The pages still remain your dummy objects. But now your intent, you're starting to talk about your business rules, what that validation is doing. Not the UI flow, but if I want to buy a particular product on Amazon, assuming I'm a guest user, what should I be able to do? I come into Amazon, I search for a product, add to shopping cart. As an unregistered user, I'm going to make a quick payment by providing email address, that's it, and I'm done. These are my business rules, the business flow that I'm really trying to validate if it's working for a specific scenario. I don't want to know about in my intent, how am I searching for a product? I know I'm searching for a product. I don't want to know if I'm doing how I'm buying that product as a guest user. I know that's a business functionality. The implementation side will take care of it. But now, my intent has become very precise in terms of your business rules, the business objectives, what the product is supposed to be doing. And once you have done that, and you separate out the functionality, now, in your business layer, you think about, if this is the rule, wait a minute, search could mean I have to do so many different things. So adding to shopping cart means I have to do so many different things. These are smaller business rules that I'm achieving now, I need to validate. So my business layer can start calling other smaller business layer operations to get that validation done. Each business layer operation would do the assertion and the validation if it is successful or not. As a result, what happens? I'm not doing any assertions really in my test intent. In my test intent, I'm just saying what are the business rules I'm going through. And as long as I've got to the end of the business rules, end of my intent, I'm good. In terms of implementing it, each business rule, I could be talking to smaller business rules, or I could be talking to pages or entities models directly to achieve that business rule implementation. So now what happens is, if any aspect of the UI changes on a specific page, I could just go to the page, update that. If the implementation of a specific business rule has changed, but the pages have remained the same, it's just a rework of how that workflow is going to be, I'll just go to my business layer and reorchestrate that, and everything continues to work fine. Of course, if there's a major change, which means a business rule or business rules and implementation side has changed, I would of course need to update all of this. But based on what the change is, now I can go and implement those changes in specific areas of my framework. Okay? Let's look at a sample for that one. So in this case, this is a Cucumber JVM example, a very simplistic example. But all I'm really saying over here is, what is my business rule? I want to create a new individual customer. To that, I'm providing some type of data, and we'll talk about this data aspect separately if we have time. But I'm just talking about the rules that I want to achieve over here. The implementation of this, anyone use BDD tools over here, Cucumber or any such tools? A couple of them have that experience in their day. So in terms of implementation for this, what I would have is, this is a simple mapping from a easily spoken language or commonly spoken language to code. I'm not going to have any implementation details over here. Instead, I'm just going to call my business layer to say, how do I create a new individual customer? I get to that aspect. So I could load the test data from here, what is required for it, and my implementation would just say, for example, search is a business layer operation. How am I going to achieve that business layer operation? I'm creating a very simple mapping of sorts. It is writing more and more wrappers. It's increasing the code, but it is hopefully making things easier for the team how to evolve the framework, how to reuse maximum. In this case, if I had, for example, I create a new individual customer and I create a new corporate customer. There's a subtle difference in the workflow, how you're going to create that. I would need to implement or rather copy whatever that implementation detail is in 2 places and do the tweak in that. And I don't want to do that. I want to make use of the refactoring capabilities of the IDE, of the programming language, to make sure that reuse is happening most, so that if any change is done, it is reflected easily across every other place. Okay? So from this business layer page object pattern, what now I start seeing is my intent has remained, what is the business requirement really that I'm trying to validate? Have as many details as required to make that intent explicit, but at the same time don't add unnecessary details as well. So creating an individual customer, getting back to code over here, if the entity that I want to use for this customer is contact info, and I just say individual 1, I have some test data representation for what individual 1 means. I don't need to specify all the details of the customer in my test intent over here. However, when the implementation side of this happens, I will load some particular file with contact info and use a section individual 1. So I'll go to contact info, I'm going to load individual 1 over there, and I'll use this in my implementation. At the same time, if I say that, or if my business rule is such that I cannot create multiple customers for having the same data, I can say randomize, which means, again, this is my framework implementation to say what aspects of this entity I need to randomize. Maybe is it just the name, maybe is it contact information, or whatever else. Is the implementation of how you're using these entities, and this is where the resource and resource handlers come into picture, right? How do you load a JSON file, and if I have a randomized aspect to it, what aspects do I randomize and how? That will make sure I can keep on repeatedly running this test and make sure it is not failing because of a test data issue, what I have specified. So you could use various such techniques. You have to, this also helps us focus on what is really important. We are talking about UI automation, what the end user is really seeing. And the later session post the break, I'm talking about a little bit about the test pyramid as well. But you want to ensure at the top layer you're having minimal automated tests so that the feedback cycle is quicker. And at that layer, you are ensuring that what is important from a business perspective, the requirement side of it, you are able to validate what is important. The abstraction layers allow us the separation of where changes need to be made as the implementation keeps evolving. The changes remain isolated. If a locator changes, I just go to that snippet, everyone starts using it. If a rule changes, I just go to that one place and everyone else who's using that rule will be able to start using it. And as a result, maintenance and scaling becomes easier. Now easier is very relative. What is easy for me might not be easy for others and vice versa. So all of this depends on what the team is. Which brings us to the most important question, which is the best pattern to use? It really depends on what the product is doing. It's not just depending on what the product is doing, it also depends on the skills and capabilities of the team implementing it. You don't want to be using really complex logic to build your framework if the team is not really skilled, equipped, capable for whatever good or bad reasons to take it to the next level to ensure that it remains running and valid throughout the life cycle of the product. And that's why it is important. So I like to use this analogy when building a test framework is if someone has to go and build a bridge across a valley, the first thing that architects does is go and studies the topography, understands what is required from a terrain perspective, how the winds are, everything. And there are also some basic requirements from the sponsors of who wants to build the bridge, what type of bridge you want to build. And you would do that feasibility study and then come up with a plan to say, this is how I want to build a bridge. But once I've got my plan ready, I don't start by ordering the lamppost or the paint for that bridge. I would start with the foundations. I would start building the bridge based on what is the right thing to be done at that point in time. At the same time, however, if I don't have that future vision of what it's supposed to be, I wouldn't know, oh, I need, there's a lead time of getting something ordered and getting it in place and ready. For example, it takes 6 months to get paint for whatever reason, and order it 6 months before I require. So I need to have that future looking view, at the same time doing what is required from the current perspective. That is what test framework should be doing. So, which pattern do we use? Developer-centric activity. It's not about the role, it's the activity. You need to understand coding well to see if this is the intent that I need to automate, how can I do it best? And for that you need to have good emphasis and a lot of emphasis rather on the code quality, what design pattern is going to be appropriate or not. James asked a very good question earlier. For a map type of thing, would you still use page object pattern? Most likely not, because it depends on what the product is doing. So think about what patterns, if applicable, will help your product, your test automation framework really evolve, because the goal is you want to run it every time the product changes. You want to validate what was working earlier on every code change that happens. Think about headless execution, how you can keep extending it, because you're not doing automation once the product has been built. You're doing it as the product is evolving. You validate it, identify what is important, automate it. So how can you keep extending it to the new set of features that keep coming in the product? And various others like logging, screenshots, video recording, refactoring, how it keeps evolving. What type of tools and utilities can you keep reusing or building that can be reused further on? And that is really important. I've used a lot of tools, mostly it has been on the open source side of things, where you build a custom framework based on the requirements and based on the skills and capabilities on the team. There are a lot of tools which are now available which will let you do these, or at least parts of these, in a very easy fashion. I've used Sauce Labs a couple of times, and it has provided to be a blessing, because I build and develop the test on my machine. It's working fine. I hook it up with CI, but the CI is actually running the test in Sauce environments. It is doing a lot of logging, screen recordings, video recordings for me. So if a test fails, I can just go back and quickly relook that and see what is happening. There are various such tools like that. A lot of practices to think about. Again, practices, you don't have to pick up each and every practice. Pick up what is really important to you, what will help the team really evolve, and scale this framework and keep it a usable framework. Some references are available for some of the content I have shown. And since we are out of time, I'll stop at this point, but the slides will be available on SlideShare. And I think the video recording should also be available sometime soon. As I said earlier, I'm available the rest of the day today to talk more about automation, about patterns, and we can take this discussion offline. Thank you so much for your time.
Coffee break. But before that, let me just say it again. Do drop by the sponsor booths, and Sauce Labs is offering a secret goodie gift sometime, probably. It's like a lucky draw, so drop your business cards in their fishbowl. And one quick thing. Do any of you know about the rapid software testing class that's about to happen in the upcoming week? Some of you? Oh good, some of you are indeed coming there. Alright, here is a unique chance. James is also not aware of this so far. I'm going to give one free seat for rapid software testing class with James. Mind you, it's a 3 days commitment during the work week. but it's a unique opportunity to learn from with James. All you need to do is make sure you impress James enough that at the end of the day, he tells me the name of the person that he would like to choose. Okay? If he doesn't recall any of the names, then we do not have that opportunity. But if he's able to recall any of the names and tell me why he would really like that person, good, then you're there. Thank you so much, and please enjoy your break. We have a 15 minutes break. The room will be divided into 3 tracks. So please look at the agenda, pick your tracks, and attend them. Thank you.